Hello and welcome to the 2 Point Conversion Podcast Football Talk. We are back after last week, and today we have a mock draft for you. We're going to run through all 32 picks. But before that, I'm joined today by Akil Guruparan. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Seeing some news drop that's interesting. we were just talking about, but excited for the draft. Excited for the next month. Things are getting heated up. I've just finally started doing a bunch of prospect watching, finding favorites. It's for a part of the year where football doesn't happen. It's probably the most exciting time of the year, right?
Yeah, I mean, you talked about it. Russell Wilson and Stephon Diggs just signed within 15 minutes of us starting this podcast. So, kind of interesting. We'll hit on Diggs a little bit, but first, I just want to do a little bit of quick housekeeping. We are less than a week from the 2 Point Conversion website launching. Super exciting time for us. We're going to have a draft guide scheduled to come out early April. We've got a ton of tools on our website, a mock draft simulator, a tool that's going to let you build your own big board. But for now, let's kind of get into some of the latest free agency news. And we'll start off with Stephon Diggs signing with the New England Patriots. Obviously, this is a team that was pretty desperate for weapons. Drake May, I think Demario Douglas was maybe his number one target last year, maybe a Kendrick Bourne, Kayshon Boutte. So for
Right.
them to add a guy like Stephon Diggs, that's a huge addition. Even if, he I think despite playing at a still pretty high level towards the beginning of last season, he's coming off of an ACL injury. And for them to only pay, basically it looks like this first year is going to be guaranteed, not much outside of that. It's an exciting addition for the New England Patriots.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big UNC fan, so I want the best for Drake May. I want him to have more tools than he had last year on what was almost certainly the least talented roster in the NFL. Um, so I think it's a really cool addition for him to have, at the very least, someone like the type of receiver he didn't have last year. He could be a kind of safety blanket. Like the whole joke for Stephon Diggs' his whole career has just been throw it up and he'll get it, throw it up there somewhere and he'll get it down. And he's not 100% of that anymore, but just having someone with that kind of confidence, someone with that kind of history, I think is going to be really awesome for him.
Yeah, I think he's taken a few steps back, in the
Oh
past
yeah.
few years, especially towards the back half of his final year in Buffalo.
Mhm.
With the Texans, he still had a little bit of juice. It'll be interesting to see. I don't think he'll play out all 3 years of this reported contract
I
with New England.
Yeah, I doubt it.
And it'll be interesting to see how they pivot in the draft, whether they're still, looking at a receiver in the first few rounds or not. But we'll kind of get into what we're here to do today, and that's a mock draft. We
Mhm.
kind of went through the top 32 picks. It's kind of weird this year. There's been no trades involving first round picks up until this point. So each team gets a slot in the first round. The way it worked, I had picks 1 through 4. You had picks 5 through 8. We rotated every 4 picks. So for every pod, it's I had a pod, you had a pod, and then all the way through 32. So
Mhm.
without further ado, let's kind of get into that a little bit. And with this first group of 4, I'm going to run through kind of the really the order of the picks, and then we'll kind of dive into each one a little bit. First overall, I had the Tennessee Titans selecting Cam Ward. Second overall, Cleveland selecting Abdul Carter. Third, the Giants selecting Shedeur Sanders. And fourth, the Patriots selecting Travis Hunter. Now we'll start out with Cam Ward, and it looks increasingly likely that he's going to be the first overall pick in April. What do you make of him, potentially being that guy? Is he worth that spot over a guy like, Travis Hunter, who seems to be, according to most people's big boards, the top overall player in this draft?
I don't think Cam Ward is the best player in this draft. I do think value neutral, I have him as a top 15-ish talent in this draft, and I think that's worth taking for a quarterback first overall when you don't have a quarterback. So I think it is, if not the right move, an extremely defensible move for Tennessee. That's going to happen. I think he's head and shoulders above any other quarterback in this draft class. And if you see a quarterback you like, I think you have to go for him, and he's the one guy. that I think is worth having that kind of attachment to in this class.
Yeah, if you're a believer in like any quarterback, I think it's something where it doesn't really matter what the rest of the field looks like if you don't have your quarterback set in stone. So the Titans, I think they seemed. I don't know if you saw the video of Brian Callahan kind of chopping it up with Cam Ward towards the end of Miami's pro day, but he seemed very, very happy with Cam Ward. I think that at this point it seems all but certain, really, that the Titans are going to end up selecting him. And like you said, if you value him as a first round caliber quarterback and you don't have your guy, I mean, Will Levis had some flashes, especially more so as a rookie than this past season. But it's something where, Cam Ward, it's a different level of prospect than Will Levis even was, right?
Yeah, I don't think Levis is going to stop you from getting a quarterback that you think can be a starter.
No, especially like at this point, Will Levis, I don't think anybody in that current front office or coaching staff was there when the Titans actually selected Will Levis. So there's no really like connective tissue. I think it's probably even more solidified by the fact that, the Titans went out, they paid Dan Moore, they went out, they paid Kevin Zeitler. They're solidifying the O-line and kind of the overall ecosystem around this pick. So I think Cam Ward, probably all but certain to be the Titans' first overall pick. Let's move on to the Browns. Abdul Carter, do you have any overall thoughts on Abdul Carter? Is there kind of a debate in your head between him and Travis Hunter as the first non-quarterback in this class?
I prefer Carter, I think. I like Travis Hunter a lot, and we'll talk about him in a couple minutes. But Abdul Carter just makes such an impact on the ball basically every snap, I think. And Hunter's thing, he's a really good cornerback, but I was thinking earlier about there's positions where you win 3 times. Like there's baseball positions in terms of like pitchers and hitters, right? There are pitcher positions where you mess up 3 times and you've had the worst game of your life, and there's hitter positions where you hit 3 times in a game and you've like had a successful game. And you could argue that edge rusher is one of the former category or one of the latter categories where like, a 3-sack game, 2.5-sack game is going to be one of your season highlights. But he almost makes that kind of impact like way more than he should for me. And the Browns already have that kind of guy in Myles Garrett. I don't know what the situation is going to be with him this year or long term in Cleveland. They obviously want to keep him. He doesn't seem all that committed to staying there. I don't know how much leverage they're going to end up having. If they have 2 phenomenal edge rushers who are that kinds of demons, they're all the scarier. If Myles Garrett leaves, they don't really have a drop off from the defense that's been basically the saving grace of their teams, like saving them from embarrassment the past several years. So for me, I think I love both players. I think for Cleveland specifically, and probably overall, I prefer Carter.
I think the more interesting question comes into effect whether you're going to evaluate Abdul Carter or Travis Hunter versus selecting a quarterback second overall, and you're kind of seeing the options run dry a little bit in free agency unless they're going to end up with like an Aaron Rodgers or a Kirk Cousins. I mean, Russell Wilson just signed with the Giants, so that's no longer an option. I think that with the Browns, I typically wouldn't advise like selecting a guy like Shedeur Sanders this high. I think that he's just quite not really the caliber of player that you would want at a second overall pick at quarterback. But I think in some respects it makes sense, right? You have Deshaun Watson, who's basically at this point a $70 million a year paperweight, for lack of a better term. And, if you're going to have a rookie contract, it's really the only way that you're going to get acceptable quarterback play without spending $100 million a year on your quarterback room. I think the other, aspect where it comes into, question is I really do like the fit of Shedeur Sanders in a Cleveland Browns offense. I think Kevin Stefanski is really good at making things simple on his quarterbacks, but while there is a lot of responsibility in that type of offense, I think that Sanders, his accuracy, how he played at Colorado, it would bode well towards him, playing well as a Cleveland Brown. But again, I just think that the level of talent that you're getting at the quarterback position, if you take Sanders, isn't really sufficient enough to, make him worthy of that second overall pick, which is why I would lean more towards an Abdul Carter, or I would personally take Travis Hunter, but I do think that the Browns will, in all likelihood, take Abdul Carter with this pick. So moving on to third overall.
I think one other thing about
Go ahead.
the Cleveland selecting a quarterback, I agree with everything you said, and I think that's almost more of a reason. Like, you've already invested $70 million or whatever into the quarterback position. I'm not really sure that a first round pick investment and getting the play that I think you would get out of Shedeur Sanders is going to justify that investment any more so than you're already getting at that position. If they feel moved to add a quarterback, I think they'd be much better served doing it in the second round with a project kind of like Jalen Milroe or maybe a Tyler Shuff or something. I don't know how you pronounce his name. Shuff.
Do you think it's a situation where it could be almost like how they did Deshaun Kaiser in 2017, where they take a shot on a guy on day two, there's very little risk in doing that versus with the second overall pick, and they kind of just throw him out there, see what happens?
I think that's more likely. It seems like a lot less like for a team for an organization that seems like so moneyball pilled. I think that's the way they'd approach it rather than, losing another first round pick to a question mark, basically.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that makes sense. And we'll talk about Shedeur Sanders a little bit more as well with this Giants pick here. The Giants just signed Russell Wilson. They signed Jameis Winston this week as well. They've added a ton of their quarterback room, but they still don't really have that long-term option. Russell Wilson's on a 1-year deal. Jameis Winston's on a 2-year deal that's very minuscule. I don't think that those players are going to prevent, a really desperate, for lack of a better term, front office and coaching staff from taking a guy like Shedeur Sanders. I think it was Adam Schefter who reported today that the Giants basically at every point this past season have been in Boulder, Colorado, working with Shedeur Sanders. They've, been at most of his games. There's just a huge level of, research that they've done on Sanders. And for them to, I wouldn't say throw it away, but definitely put it by the wayside and potentially pass on him when they don't have a long-term option at quarterback. I mean, the clock is ticking on this Giants team, on the front office, on the coaching staff. I think, it would probably have been better served to maybe cut ties with this regime if you're ownership there, because it would prevent a hasty decision. I think that, Shedeur Sanders, he is the pick here for the Giants. It's who I ended up going with. But it's kind of different than the Cleveland situation because Daboll puts a lot more on his quarterbacks. He's going to expect a lot more. The offensive line doesn't get a lot of help. Like you're asking a lot of, it's basically iso ball on the outside, right?
Yeah.
With those tackles. Whereas, with Stefanski, he's more willing to, drop extra blockers and pass protection to give his quarterbacks more time. That's not really the case with, the Giants and Daboll. I think that he's just, the ball needs to come out quicker with him. And I think on a team that doesn't really have a solid offensive line foundation, we're talking about a quarterback who's not really all that mobile, who ran into a lot of sacks last year. I wouldn't love the fit. I think if you're the Giants, you're running out of places to bet on a quarterback. But I think a desperate team would probably make the decision, even if he doesn't necessarily fit their offensive infrastructure, to select a quarterback here.
Yeah, if it's not actual public knowledge, it is all but public knowledge, right? That this is the front office's last chance. And if you're in that position, you're taking a quarterback in the draft. It's basically the only way to save your job. I think smarter ownership recognizes that and doesn't put his team in a place where they're going to take a quarterback for job saving purposes. But that's, things have already been done. A thing I kind of like about the Giants taking Shedeur is that in a lot of ways he's kind of the anti-Daniel Jones, I think.
Yeah.
So they will at least be ready to see something different. Shedeur, who lives on accuracy and anticipation and is like the only quarterback in this class who's not primarily a see it, throw it kind of guy to me. That's going to be welcome. I love his work over the middle of the field. I think Christian Kirk and whoever else plays in the slot for the Giants is going to be like a really high volume target, because I think Shadeur's best work and the work that translates most easily to the pros is going to be over the middle in that kind of intermediate range. I don't. We've talked about this before. He turns a lot of pressures into sacks, like an unholy number of his pressures turn into sacks because he's not that mobile in the pocket and he runs backwards a lot instead of trying to find space where he can. If there's a guy who can turn that into something useful as a mentor, it might be Russell Wilson, who has kind of the same tendencies but made it work for a long time when he had the legs that he had in Seattle. So maybe there's something there. I would kind of be questioning how well this would work, but there are some things that I like about it. And like you said, it's going to be the desperation play.
How much thought do you think they'll put into maybe selecting Travis Hunter over Shedeur Sanders?
I think you think about it. I
It's hard, right? It's hard.
It is hard. It's hard to not imagine them taking a quarterback, but the other thing, and this is like much more of my justification for a lot of the picks in the middle of this round, I think, is that the Giants lost Saquon Barkley. Before that, they lost, like a while before that, they lost Odell Beckham Jr. It seems like they're kind of a program, or not a program, but a fan base in search of a star and a personality, like a face. I'm not sure that Shedeur is that. He's been. I think he's tried so hard to manage the media expectations that come around who his dad is, that he's become, like a completely respectable, completely like appropriately confident young man, young player. But Travis Hunter, for lack of a better word, has a kind of aura that the Giants are definitely looking for as a fan base. I don't know how much a front office worries about that, especially one that's in these dire straits, but you have to think about it.
Yeah, I think I like to think of it as there's almost two drafts going on in the NFL every year. There's one with the quarterback needy teams, and then there's one with everybody else, right? And there's a lot less quarterback needy teams than like last year, for instance. But when you do need a quarterback, it's going to change how you approach the draft so much. It's almost like you're throwing away the rest of the board when you have such a huge need at that position. It maybe kind of clouds your actions a little bit. Whereas like, in let's say 2023, I think for instance, it was, the Bryce Young, CJ Stroud, Anthony Richardson type of draft. We saw obviously those players go with the top 4 picks. Will Anderson went 3rd. I think that, those 3 teams at the top acting as, those that needed quarterbacks, everybody was vying to get up to that 3rd overall pick above the Colts.
Yeah.
Right. Everybody. And obviously Will Levis ended up falling out of the first round after what most people considered, he was probably I think he was the betting favorite for the 2nd overall pick the day before the draft. Right.
Yeah.
So
it might have been that. It might have been like he at least evened odds with Stroud, I think, like just in the week before.
People thought he was going to be a top 4 pick. Right.
Yeah.
And I think, you see guys like, Jalen Carter go and fall a little bit further down the draft board. In part, there was some other stuff there as well, but, he fell, 9th, 10th overall. So I think you see just teams act differently when they need a quarterback. And, that's not to say that Travis Hunter isn't this incredible prospect, but he's not the 4th best player in this draft class. And for let's kind of move on to the New England Patriots here. For them to get him with the 4th overall pick, I think it's a really exciting pairing for him to fall to 4th overall. And we see the Patriots just signed Stephon Diggs, right?
Yeah.
In this scenario, they're likely playing Travis Hunter as a wide receiver as well.
Mhm.
He, despite Stephon Diggs signing there, I think would immediately be their number 1 wide receiver.
Roma
He's
didn't say who,
incredibly
right?
elusive. So I think it's just it would be an incredible pairing between him and Stephon Diggs, and you throw like a Pop Douglas in there. I know the Patriots have a huge need along their offensive line. Like they need what 3 pieces additionally to
Yeah.
I think Morgan Moses and Mike Onwenu. So I mean, depending on how you view Cole Strange, but he's probably not a starting level guard at this
No,
point.
no, he's not.
Yeah, so I think that would probably be a priority on day 2 if Travis Hunter is here. But I think regardless, if you're the Patriots, you're hoping that 2 quarterbacks go among the top 3 picks, because then you're sitting in a scenario where you have Abdul Carter or Travis Hunter falling right into your lap. And the Patriots aren't good enough to kind of fixate on their needs at this point. They just need to
Yeah,
take
they're
talent. They
yeah,
need to take talent.
exactly. They're the least. I said before they were the least talented roster in the NFL. I think every position except for quarterback is a position of need when you're in that kind of situation.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, they'll have their opportunity to find a left tackle eventually, but
Mhm.
it's a different tier of prospect when you're reaching into like Will Campbell. I love Armand Membu, who we'll talk about soon, but I
Yeah,
wouldn't take him above Travis Hunter. I think it's just a different level of player, and I think he would immediately transform the receiving options for this Patriots offense.
definitely. The way I think about this too, kind of, is like Gerard. The final nail in the coffin for Gerard Mayo seems to be that he didn't figure out a way to get the number 1 pick in their last game of the season. If they had gotten the number 1 pick, at least 50% of the time, they're taking Travis Hunter anyways, right? Like that's the
That
kind of level they're sprinting to the podium on this one.
Yeah, yeah. I think if it's not like if somebody's not paying a premium for
Mhm.
a Cam Ward, then I think Travis Hunter immediately is going to be a really really strong option at number 1. And I don't even remember the last time a corner or wide receiver. In this case, I think he'd play primarily wide receiver. The
Yeah.
Patriots signed Carlton Davis in free agency, so they have 2 starting outside corners already with
Mhm.
him and Christian Gonzalez. So I really love the fit here. Do you have any final thoughts on Travis Hunter going to the Patriots in our mock draft?
I think that's it. I think it's just like you
It's
said, he
easy.
falls into their laps, right? It's really easy.
Yeah, I'll let you take the lead. This was your group of 4.
Mhm.
Go ahead and kind of detail these 4 picks that you had in this mock draft, and kind of your first overall thoughts on Mason Graham going to the Jaguars.
Yeah. So this is another one that seems kind of settled in the same way that Cam Ward and Shadur Sanders seem to be to the Titans and Giants, unless the Browns do something that we don't expect. Uh, Jaguars insiders all over the place have been saying expect a defensive line pick. I think it's one of those picks that I think basically 100% of mock drafts being written at this point are penciling in. It's the fit is obvious, the talent's obvious. Mason Graham, I, I think, is at least close to the caliber of prospect that Carter and Hunter are. Doing what he does, he's got uh, like really violent hands. He creates havoc up the middle in a way that Jacksonville really, really desperately needs. Um, so that one seems pretty easy. At 6, I have Las Vegas taking Armand Membu. This one I don't see as often, but I like it a lot. Membu, as like in terms of his ability, not necessarily his build, reminds me of what Pete Carroll was looking for when he took Charles Cross 3 years ago in the draft, as like this really long tackle who can maul in the run game, who gets to spots really easily, and can do a lot of stuff for you both in the run game and the pass game, but is more of a run first tackle. I think he thought he was getting more of that with Cross than he ended up getting, but I think with Membu, it's legit. He's a really cool player. I've seen people take the running back here, Genty, but I think Carroll's going to really like what Membu brings to a team before he needs to focus on getting it back. The Jets, I have taken Tyler Warren. This is the first of those like they need a face picks for me because the Jets need help a lot of places on offense other than with an unhappy Garrett Wilson. And Tyler Warren does a little bit of everything, and he does a little bit of everything really well. He brings you personality, and he's also like able to be the focal point of an offense. He does dirty work really well. He catches balls. He runs when you need him to. He can be a red zone weapon. He like creates his own celebrity. I think he's a very Jets pick here, even if the Jets have needs in other positions. Tight end is definitely something that they need. They've gotten like basically average play for a while from there, and now I think they've lost even that. And then Carolina, we're both Carolina fans. We've been talking in our group chats about Mykel Williams being a kind of presumptive Panthers pick at this point. Cool player. We really like his tape. I think he fits both as a 4-3 and 3-4 edge rusher. I don't really know what like people pigeonholing him into one or the other are really saying, but he fits with what it looks like Ejiro Evero has been trying to do with his defense and not really been able to do for the past couple of years. If he truly was playing as diminished as he says he was, there's a lot to be unlocked there. He can be like a mega athlete in the way that Carolina's front office has really loved the past couple of years. But I like his traits. I think he's got very good hands for someone who played as little edge as he did last year. I would be interested to see what happens here. I think it's definitely not a boring pick, and I think it would be pretty cool to see what happens.
I'll kind of start with Mason Graham. I think it would just be a really good pick for Jacksonville to get. I think a high floor player in Mason Graham, just a really good finesse rusher against passing downs. I think he's somebody that's going to be able to play 3 downs as an interior defensive lineman. He'll probably be a 3 tech on first, second down, and then can slide inside on third downs. So if you're looking at a defensive line of Josh Hines-Allen, Mason Graham, Eric Armstead, and Trayvon Walker, that's a really formidable defensive line. And I almost wonder whether Mason Graham would be the pick here, or we'll talk about him a lot sooner than people think with one of these upcoming picks. But I really wonder how much thought the Jags will put into Kenneth Grant with this 5th overall pick, just because he's a little bit cleaner of a fit on early downs than Mason Graham would be. Still, I think Graham is in all likelihood going to be the better NFL player, but Kenneth Grant also brings a pretty rare skill set at his size. So I wonder if we're kind of looking at the wrong Michigan lineman, but I do think this will be Mason Graham with this 5th overall pick, especially with how I think it was James Gladstone was talking in a recent press conference. So I think that it's a really solid fit for Jacksonville. Just a really, really good player in Mason Graham. And with Membu going to the Las Vegas Raiders in your mock draft kind of selections, I think that, very smart offensive lineman. He's got a lot of power, really good anchor. I think that he moves very well. I like what you brought up with, Pete Carroll trying to build out that offense. This is an offensive line that's good, not great. There's a bunch of B- type players along this line. I think that adding somebody, like him, you'll have Jackson Powers Johnson, you'll have Colton Miller still. I think it would, potentially turn this offensive line from really good to great. I think Genty makes a lot of sense here too. You brought up his name. He, to me, Pete Carroll, I think that if you pass on Genty, you can still get a really good running back. And I think it
Yeah.
was the offensive coordinator is Chip Kelly, and you have two guys from the team that he coached, Ohio State, right there in the second round with
Uh-huh.
Travion Henderson, with Quinshawn Judkins. So I almost wonder if by taking a tackle here, it would set them up better to select a guy like that in the second round. Do you have any thoughts on kind of that potential fit?
I think that that's definitely part of my thinking is that there's a lot of good running back talent in this class. I had forgotten about the Chip Kelly angle, but that makes a lot of sense. Both of those backs would make sense in Vegas. Um, and the other thing, I guess, is that I'm trying to remember. Like Pete Carroll loves spending day two picks on running backs. I
Yeah,
guess he traded up for Rashad Penny, but there was like Charbonnet was a third round pick, right?
yeah.
Who was
Second,
the guy?
actually, Kenneth
Second round.
Walker.
Who was the guy? Yeah, Ken Walker was a second round pick, I think. Who was the guy from Notre Dame? Procise. They drafted in the third, I want to say.
Something like that. I
Um,
think Chris Carson was a third round pick as well.
yeah, so he like that is an angle or a tradition that he's had a lot of success with and that has worked for him. And then the one time he traded into the first round to take a running back, it was Rashad Penny, and he had his best years in another uniform. So I really wouldn't be surprised to see Pete Carroll think second round over first round for a running back in this class.
Yeah, I think he'll be tempted by Genty for sure.
For
Just
sure.
like the tape is unreal with Ashton Genty, and I
Mhm.
honestly think that multiple running backs are going to go higher than what people expect. I know a lot of people have Genty to Vegas, but I really think that Amarian Hampton could go higher than people think. I think Henderson could go first round. Caleb Johnson maybe could
Yeah.
go top 40-ish. So I think there's everybody loves to talk about the running back depth in the class, but the top of the running back class, especially, I mean, you have two really good first round quality running backs with,
Mhm.
Marion Hampton and Ashton Genty. So really in most other drafts, you'd see a Marion Hampton be a running back one. Like I
Yeah.
think he probably would have been taken above a guy like Najee Harris, for instance, a few
For
years ago.
sure. For sure.
So, moving on to your pick for the New York Jets, Tyler Warren, just a really fun weapon all around.
Mhm.
In that offense, you'd have, Justin Fields, Brees Hall, Garrett Wilson, Tyler Warren. But in my head, it's with Tyler Warren, you're adding somebody that can affect both the running and passing game as a tight end.
Yeah.
It might take a year or two for him to kind of fully come around to the NFL game. Tight ends just take a minute to fully adjust, but
Yeah.
he's somebody who is just a really dynamic, like athletic weapon. He didn't test at the combine, but if he did, I think his numbers would have been really fun to see. So
Mhm.
I love this fit. I think Justin Fields was pretty fond of Cole Kmet by the time
Yeah.
his tenure in Chicago ended. So adding just a threat like that, I know the Jets have needs in a lot of different places. Like they need another tackle. They could use
Mhm.
another interior defensive lineman, but it also might just come down to this is just the best football player available.
I think so. I think a lot of times people kind of think of tight end as a luxury position compared to either uh, like every down or wide receivers or positions in the trenches. And I think both for the Jets and their roster makeup and for the player that Tyler Warren is, that's like extremely not the case. Like you said, tight ends take some time to acclimate to the NFL. He's not going to be Brock Bowers as a receiver. No one probably is ever going to be Brock Bowers again, but he does bring things that are going to make an impact right away as a blocker, as a kind of like Swiss Army knife weapon. So I think, and as a security blanket, maybe for Justin Fields, if that's like, on simple routes and stuff like that. Um, so in because of all of that and just being a baller, I like this more than I think I'd like most of the other options of need for the Jets.
He's got like a weird profile too. It took him a while to break out. Penn State just has a ton of tight ends constantly. So he was a fifth year senior. I think he was
Mhm.
an All American this past year, maybe second team behind Fannin. I can't remember who was first team, but
That sounds
um,
right.
yeah, he was either first or second team, him and Harold Fannin. But I think one of the things that sticks out to me with, dynamic tight ends like him is with a lot of these guys, you're adding a player who's just dynamic over the middle of the field, who, is smart with the ball in his hands. And, with a lot of receivers, they're more boundary guys. I mean, you have a lot of, receivers that are really great threats over the middle of the field, but adding
Mhm.
somebody with power that can take hits from linebackers consistently, I think it would be a really fun pick for the Jets. On the Panthers end, taking Michael Williams, you mentioned it, just a perfect fit in a scheme for Ejiro Evero, the defensive coordinator there. I think that, Michael Williams had a really weird role in Georgia. Despite all the
Mhm.
talent for that team, they constantly ran like a 3-3-5 defense almost, where
Yeah.
it's kind of gimmicky almost, and it's designed to keep up with teams like Alabama and teams like Tennessee, where it's like just the types of offenses that you're facing at the college level is so different in the SEC.
Yeah.
So, he played more of a four eye lined up inside the tackle, so he's
Mhm.
not necessarily going to get the production numbers that people would expect from a 6'6", 265 top 10 pick. But I think, when you look at it compared to, the previous years, he had a better, he's better tape than a guy like Trayvon Walker coming out of Georgia a few years
Yeah, I
ago,
agree.
in my opinion. Obviously, he didn't test as well as Trayvon
Mhm.
Walker, but I think the tape is better. And he said at the combine he was playing at 60%. I don't know how true that is, but if he's even, like even if it's
Let's call it like
upscaling,
80, right? Like,
yeah, I mean,
call it 80, and I think he's still like you get impressed with what you could imagine at 100.
right. And you look at games against like Texas where he's going up against, a really good offensive line. He's just very impressive. I think that he, in most years is a top 10 pick. I'm kind of surprised not many people are coming away with him as like a top 10 player in their rankings, considering, everything that Georgia system, his injury, the physical traits. I think that he's a really, really solid prospect.
Yeah. You mentioned that Texas game. I turned it on a while ago, back when the kind of foregone conclusion seemed to be that Carolina was going to be taking Jalen Walker, because I wanted to watch Jalen Walker. And Michael Williams just kept showing up on film for me. Like, Walker was doing the things he was doing. He has a couple of really cool plays in that game. There's the one
Yeah.
highlight where he like comes at Quinn Ewers as a spy and absolutely destroys him. But play to play, Michael Williams just kept doing something, like getting past somebody, or like using his
Yeah.
hands really well, or like making plays over and over again. And I was like, if that's the guy that he can be, that like he's going to be a really, really good NFL player.
Yeah, and that was a little bit later in the season too. He injured his ankle in the first
Exactly.
game against Clemson, so it's
Mhm.
like he got better as the season went on following that game. I mean, obviously took a little bit of a step back in the meantime,
Mhm.
but he's just a very, very solid football player. Moving on to the next four picks, I had this group of four. For the Saints, I took Kenneth Grant. For the Bears, Shamar Stewart. San Francisco, Will Campbell. Honestly, a best case scenario for them. And for the
Yeah.
Dallas Cowboys, I had them selecting Ashton Genty. We'll start with the Saints with Kenneth Grant. First thing I want to say here is I think that Grant's going to go a lot higher than people expect. Most people see him mocked in the, let's say, 16 to 25 range. I think that there's a very real chance he goes top 10. I think he's a very, let's say, it's a rare skill set that he has at his size, where, he's a pocket pusher on passing downs. He's able to stay on the field for passing downs, but he's also just a downright dominant like space eater. on rushing downs, on first down, on second down. I think that he's just overall that's a rare skill set to find, and that type of player, at his size, it's very valuable to NFL teams. Finding guys that can stay on the field for all three downs, and he's able to do that. And with the Saints in particular, the interior of their defensive line is just not good. Brian Bresee was arguably one of the worst interior defensive linemen last season. And even if he's going to develop a little bit more, he's somebody that could potentially play alongside Kenneth Grant. And I know like the numbers, you look at a defensive tackle stats, they're not going to really show you the entire picture, especially Kenneth Grant, who's playing alongside Mason Graham. Josiah Stewart was really good there. I really like this fit for the Saints. I think it would be a pretty slam dunk pick in my opinion, but I'm also higher on Kenneth Grant than most people. What do you make of the Saints potentially taking Grant here?
I like it. I would be a little surprised because I don't think we've fully come around to space eating defensive tackles being like this valuable unless they've got more sack production than I think he does.
Right.
Like Derek Brown was a top 10 pick, but he had maybe he had similar sack production. I don't remember his exact numbers. It was like lower than people thought, but I think it was still higher than what Kenneth Grant has.
I don't remember. He was just dominant at Auburn. I think during the season he was mocked as like a top 10, top 5-ish pick. So Derek Brown in 2019 had 4 sacks as a senior, and Kenneth Grant, let's see, playing alongside Mason Graham, he had 3 sacks. So not quite the same production, but he also was, again, playing next to Mason Graham, next to Josiah Stewart, who
I can see it. I'm curious. We'll talk about it later as well. I'm really curious after Mason Graham how the NFL ends up stacking the next 3 or 4 defensive tackles between Grant, Nolan, the guy from Oregon, Harmon, all do like the 3 all do kind of slightly different things, but there's a lot of NFL teams that are asking their defensive tackles to multitask, to move in and out, or to be able to 1-gap and 2-gap a little bit more. And so I'm curious who they think they can do the most with. Grant's got unreal size and tools. He might be the pick for that reason, like the first one of those 3 to go for that reason. But I don't remember a ton of top 10 picks like him recently. The Saints are bad enough on the interior that they could definitely break that trend. I wouldn't be surprised. I think it would be a decent pick.
But maybe the NFL just isn't high enough on defensive tackles for him to be the guy. Even Dexter Lawrence fell to halfway through the first round, and he was considered a good maybe around the same tier as Kenneth Grant was. Obviously, he's well surpassed even what the ceiling was for what people expected for Dexter Lawrence. But I think Kenneth Grant's he's somebody that's going to be able to play all 3 downs. Shamar Stewart, I think, to the Bears makes a ton of sense. I could see Ashton Jeanty going here as well, but obviously falls to Dallas. But I think that Ryan Poles is really going to fall in love with the athletic testing for Shamar Stewart. He's always kind of been one to value testing over college production. So for that defensive line to be like Gervon Dexter, Grady Jarrett, Montez Sweat, Shamar Stewart, it's got a lot of athleticism, a lot of size. Whether Stewart can put it together, we'll see. He only had 4.5 sacks throughout his entire tenure in college, which is kind of insane for a top 10 pick. But I think that if you're the Bears, it's a swing and it's a necessary one. Like they need more talent on the defensive side, especially up front. They've already invested in the trenches offensively. So for them to get a guy like Stewart to have the tools to maybe potentially become a plus, defensive starter, I think out of the gate he'll be able to take advantage of lesser athletic tackles, but moving forward from that, how is he going to be able to develop from that point?
Yeah, Stewart's for me, I think this is higher than I would take him, but I do agree that the athletic tools are going to really appeal to a front office like the Bears and a few others. If Green Bay were picking here, I think they'd run to the podium for him. But I like his I like his pass rush arsenal. I don't think he's like just a kind of tools guy who accidentally gets to the quarterback sometimes. I think he has actual moves. But I also think finishing plays is a skill, and it's something that's kind of hard to develop as a pro. Um, I don't. Maybe the Bears have enough juice now at the rest of their defense that they can afford to have somebody who creates a little bit of havoc, and they can have some. They have other guys who can clean that up for him. Um, but I'm a little bit shaky. I would much rather add him to a good defensive line to make it great than an average one to try and make it good.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I mean, they added Deo Odingbo as well through free agency. So I think overall that's a team that's good, that's wanted to build out a full pass rush rotation. And they'll have options like I said, Ashton Genty is somebody that could very well be this pick. I could even see
Yeah.
Amarian Hampton being in play for the Bears if Genty goes to the Raiders at 6 overall. So I think that they by solidifying their interior offensive line, opened themselves up to just selecting the best player available. Moving on to the San Francisco 49ers, this is a dream scenario for them. They're able to select Will Campbell, who in this scenario would either play right tackle, take over for McKivitz, or you could play left guard in the short term, and then once Trent Williams retires, they could slide him to left tackle. I think that getting a versatile, really smart offensive lineman, this is something that they need desperately. I mean, they need a lot of things. They lost a ton of players this offseason, but getting a guy who a lot of people project to be the first offensive lineman taken, I think it makes a ton of sense, and I think he fits what Shanahan wants to do as well.
He feels like he was built in a lab for a Shanahan offense.
Yeah.
Like he moves so well. He's really smart. He's got like a ridiculous anchor for his size. Can play guard or tackle. Can like block zone or man. Yeah, there's not a ton to say here. This is like one of those teams that's like this is everything lines up for them here.
One of the more fun picks that we had is Dallas selecting Ashton Genty, just an electric player. We kind of hit on him a little bit, but for them to have, offense now that would consist of an offensive line that had a ton of investment, Cooper Beebe, Tyler Guyton, Terrence Steele on the other side. They've got a few more players there. CeeDee Lamb, obviously. Dak Prescott's going to come back from injury. But for them to have a dynamic element in there as well, right? You add in Ashton Genty behind a young developing offensive line. I think a lot of people saw what the rushing attack of Zeke Elliott and Tony Pollard was able to do a few years ago. They added Javonte Williams, I think Miles Sanders as well. Those guys aren't very good, but for them to have a bell cow type of running back, added to this offense, it just gives them an element that they haven't had. They really, the past 2 years, their offense has taken a pretty noticeable step back on the rushing attack. And I think it makes your offense a little bit more predictable as well. And for a guy who, Schottenheimer is who he is, but, make things a little bit simpler on him and get him just a dynamic running back that defenses are going to have to account for. If not, when they're running the ball, when they're, making play action plays or things of that nature, I think it would be a really fun fit for Dallas.
Yeah, This is another team, I think, where if Genty goes in the top 11, a guy like Omarion Hampton is in serious play. That another one of those teams where that's how much a really good running back uh, helps them get away from Dak and CD Lamb having to shoulder as much of the offense as they've had to the past couple of years, and like not quite been able to be consistent enough. Adding that kind of chain mover and that kind of home run threat at the same time takes a lot of burden off of them, makes their offense, like kind of any offense, more multiple, less predictable, more like able to beat you in different ways in a way that they've been like really, really lacking since that backfield that you were talking about.
So we'll move on here to picks 13 through 16, which you selected. Um, we'll go ahead and start on the Miami Dolphins selecting Will Johnson. Go ahead and kind of explain your thought process behind this one.
So Miami loves a defensive back, and they really need one across from. Oh God, who was the guy there? I know this.
Jalen Ramsey.
Yeah, across from Ramsey, they really need a second cornerback. Will Johnson is a guy who I guess the industry seems to like a little bit less than consensus. I like him at about this spot. He's big, he's physical. He, his 2023 was incredible. This year he was a little bit more up and down, but he's got all of these tools. He knows how to play the game. He played on a really good defense. He comes from a kind of winning culture. I think he brings a lot of juice to that defense where they got attacked a lot. Like the offenses were kind of able to just throw where Jalen Ramsey wasn't and have a lot of success on them. And Will Johnson, I think, shores that up in a major way, especially after they lost Javon Holland as well.
Yeah, this is a team that's currently starting Duck Storm as their second corner.
That's UNC legend Storm Duck, actually.
Storm Duck, yeah. My bad. I was reading the depth chart, and the last name comes before first.
Yep.
I think it's the Dolphins need a ton of talent, right? They had some minor additions, right? I think they signed Ashton Davis, they signed James Daniels, Nick Westbrook-Akine. Their team is so fragile that every single one of their players has injury concerns, right? Tua, Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, Terran Armstead, even some players on defense like Jalen Phillips. Like there's just so many players on this team where it's like you're banking on them to potentially play a full season, right? That's just a rarity for a lot of these guys. I think that Will Johnson makes a ton of sense for their back end, right? I think it's a team that definitely values, players on the boundary more than those up front, right? And that's not to say like they've invested a ton in their pass rush, right? Jalen Phillips, Chop Robinson, Bradley Chubb, they sent a first round pick for him a few years ago. So there's a ton of investment there. But again, like on the interior, they need some help there. Offensively, like they still need 2 to 3 more offensive linemen as well.
They really miss those guards, like Robert Hunt, especially. I did think about giving them an offensive lineman here. I don't know that I value anyone who I think is going to play interior lineman highly enough in this draft to let them be selected at 13.
Yeah, I think I wonder how they view Patrick Paul, their second round pick from a year ago. Terran Armstead, it looks as though he might potentially retire. I also wonder how they view Kelvin Banks, whether they view him as an option for their offensive line.
Yeah. For me, he's a tackle through and through. If Armstead is ready to retire, he definitely could be the pick. But I think they need a lot more interior help than exterior right now.
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways they could go. I don't see them being a Tyler Booker team because I think he's so antithetical to the way that offensive line would function that it would just be so out of place, right? Like he is a gap guy through and through.
Yeah.
You put him in a Mike McDaniel offense, and I think his brain would explode, honestly. So I don't think he would necessarily be an option. Maybe a Gray Zabel, who we'll talk about a little bit later. But
Yeah.
overall, a fun pick for Miami here.
Mhm. Indianapolis, I think, loves to get Keldon Banks here for exactly those reasons. That like they lost a lot on their offensive line. They really desperately need to protect a quarterback, and if they're still going to try and make Anthony Richardson work, they need to have someone who can help their quarterback and get out. And Kelvin Banks definitely is that for me. His tackle tape is like pretty sick to watch. He's just kind of he I don't he's kind of the anti Membu, where Membu was like a run first tackle. Banks kind of treats everything like he's pass protecting. He just doesn't let anyone get in the middle. So he's not like a gap opener, but he's not always much of a people mover. But he's got such discipline and such good feet as a blocker that he gets to spots really well. He can help a scrambling quarterback once he sees that they're scrambling, and he's not going to let you get sacked. He's just a house. And I think if Indianapolis tries to make Richardson work, Richardson's going to really appreciate that. That's always going to be a side he can leak out to and try to make plays. It's going to be one place he doesn't have to worry about pressure coming from. But also, in a traditional sense, I think he's just a really good cornerstone for an offensive line.
Yeah, I think the Colts are a really interesting team. They kind of shored up the secondary. Cam Bynum, Charvarius Ward.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem like they're going to be in on taking a corner in the first round like they maybe would have been before free agency.
Mhm.
They also have a ton of like just number twos in terms of their pass rush, like right, like Latu, Quiddy Pay. I think they still have Taekwon Lewis, Abukum. So I don't know if they'll take a pass rusher, but I think here it's just there's also a case to be made that Kellen Banks might just be the best player available with this pick.
Yeah.
Where
I like Kelvin
it's
Banks a lot. I watched him like pretty recently, and I liked him more than I was expecting to.
yeah, and
That's honestly true for most of the Texas guys. I think this Texas roster is just
yeah,
ridiculously talented.
that and he's definitely battle tested as well, right? Like went up against
Mhm.
Georgia 2 times, went up against Ohio State, just pretty much any major program you can think of. He was a part, or he went up against it, I should say.
Mhm.
I like the pick for the Colts. Atlanta, you had Jalen Walker, just a really fun linebacker edge hybrid type. I'm really high on Walker under the assumption that he's a full time edge at the next level. I think he's pretty bendy, had a lot more in his tool belt than I was expecting going into watching him. Just really electric, very powerful, has some finesse in there too. Always knows where the ball is and always working towards the ball. Um, I think he kind of benefited. We talked about it a little bit with Mike Hill. He kind of benefited from the Georgia scheme almost as a faux QB spy almost
Mhm.
with Georgia, where basically the entire D line in front of him would eat and then he would attack. So it just made things a little bit easier when he was, blitzing from a stand up spot. But, I really liked him off the edge as well. The Falcons, this is kind of this would be their only addition essentially the entire offseason, right? They
Yeah.
had basically no cap room. If anything, they lost players, right? They lost Grady Jarrett. um,
Mhm.
they desperately needed defenders, and I think that Walker is a good player, and I think that the Falcons are pretty happy to have him at 15. It's pretty likely that Walker goes above this spot as well. So the Falcons, I would be pretty surprised if they don't trade back, right? I don't think they have a third round pick right now. Maybe only like 4 to 5 picks in total for the entire draft. So just the asset pool is incredibly low for them, but a fun pick there.
Yeah, I am curious if Walker were to fall to them, if they'd still trade back. I think every Falcons fan I have talked to or seen online has been so into the idea of this happening for the fact of him having played at UGA and being from
Yeah,
Atlanta.
that's
Uh,
the one.
I don't think the Falcons take a lot of UGA players in kind of the same way that the Panthers are famous for never having drafted a Clemson player.
Yeah.
Um, so that like I think of that for this next pick as well, but I wonder how much they feel a need to reinvigorate their fan base after how badly the Kirk Cousins thing went for them, if that's a consideration at all. I think Walker's also just a really good player for them. I think they have a kind of defense where he can do damage from multiple spots. He has talked repeatedly in his pre-draft process about being a joker, about being someone who can play a lot of roles and play them really well. Uh, there are QBs who need containing in the NFC South and in the league more broadly, and he is a heat-seeking missile as a QB spy. I don't think anyone is getting past him in the NFL if they try to break contain. And as an edge rusher, he has some moves, he has some bend, a work in progress, but someone who can do damage right away with his tools and athleticism. As a linebacker in space, he at least has experience. I don't love him working in space, but I think, if you running a multiple defense, he at least is not going to kill you. And moreover, I think, I love his potential in the run game as playing off ball or playing stand up because of how well he keeps his hands clean. He just consistently avoids blocks that would otherwise destroy him if he had to take them on, but he just finds a way to find a path to the ball and not get interrupted. I think that's something that a lot of teams that let him play standing up would really, really appreciate. And
yeah, I think he works really well as like a 3-4 outside linebacker, right? Where if especially if he's playing weak side in the run game, I think he's just gonna wreak havoc, kind of crashing in. He's very smart in that as well, as if the quarterback is gonna keep it, he's gonna know. Just very fun player, I think. A, rushing the passer, just his relentlessness, and then B, just his recognition in the run game as well, for sure.
Yep.
What do you think of your next pick, Arizona selecting Tet McMillan?
Yeah, second straight kind of hometown pick. I mean, obviously Tet Aroa is from Hawaii, but he plays his college ball also at Arizona. So another pick for a fan base that feels kind of like they have all of the energy that they ever had around drafting Kyler, and then the energy that they had around getting Marvin Harrison Jr. seems to have become pretty restless. And I have thought and said about the Panthers that I don't want them using 2 straight first round picks on a wide receiver. Here, I think it kind of works because I think getting Tet McMillan allows Marvin Harrison to do the things that he should have been able to do last year. Hopefully with a year, he's playing a little bit more confident and a little bit more free, but he's also going to be less forced to do everything because of the way that Tet is such a perfect possession receiver. He gets open, he gets in and out of his breaks, he's fluid, but he's also a vacuum, right? His catch radius is huge. He doesn't have to be given the coverage beater routes in order to be an option. And so having that safety valve hopefully lets Marvin Harrison be the person that Arizona needed him to be last year and unleashes this offense. And in that sense, I think you're not trying to make up for the pick that you made last year. You're trying to augment it and make it actually happen. So it might seem like it's a redundant use of resources, but I think it's they fit really well together.
Yeah, I think if you select Tet McMillan 16th overall, you're going to put him at X, and then you can move Marv Harrison kind of around the formation and allow him to take advantage of a little bit more mismatches. I like Wilson there. In this case, would be number 3 receiver. But I think if you have the ability to add Tet McMillan to this offense, they kind of need another weapon, right? They have Trey McBride, they have Marvin Harrison. I think getting one more guy in that offense would kind of spice things up just a little bit more. I think this pick almost makes me more excited about Marvin Harrison than it does Tet McMillan's fit in that offense, right? Yeah. Where it opens up a lot more. A lot of people think that, this might be just overlapping skill sets if you add a Tet McMillan, a 6'4" receiver to a wide receiver room with Marv Harrison, who's also 6'4". But Marvin Harrison really is a little bit more of a route running type than a possession type. he's a lot more skilled than what people think. And while his rookie season was underwhelming, it was still a really good rookie season, right? 800 to 900 yards. Had a few
It
really good
looks,
games in there as well.
yeah, it looks a lot worse with the context of like Neighbors and
Yeah,
Brian Thomas for
right.
doing what they did.
Yeah,
But, like
and it's
he,
also like those
like he was billed
guys.
as what he was, right? Like he was supposed to be kind
Yeah,
of generational. He's got these bloodlines, and he turned in just like a very good rookie season. But there's still something there, right? I think the point
yeah,
is, uh, there's talk of a team like the Panthers taking McMillan at 8, and I think if the Panthers take him, that's kind of an admission that they're like letting go of their investment that they made last year in Liget. Here, I don't think that's the case, right? I don't think you're taking McMillan to replace like cut loose a sunk cost in Marv. I think you're just adding something.
it gives them an element that they wouldn't have, right?
Mm-hmm.
Moving on to the next set of 4, we'll start with Cincinnati. I had this group of teams, their picks, with the 17th pick. I had the Bengals selecting Alabama linebacker Jahad Campbell, just a really fun linebacker, very fast, very quick, recognizes and goes to the ball. I think that the Bengals they added Al Golden as their defensive coordinator, former linebacker coach at Notre Dame. I think that he's gonna see a guy like this and just kind of fall in love with the skill set that Jahad Campbell would bring. And Campbell's somebody that's going to be able to affect a lot of different aspects of the defense. Being a linebacker, the pass game, he'll be able to be very effective in the run game as well. I really think Campbell is a fun linebacker prospect. The only real question I have in his game is he's more of a reactive guy than proactive. I really like Carson Schwetzinger out of UCLA. I think he's a little bit more of a diagnose before the snap type of player, whereas Jahad Campbell is going to react a little bit more to what he sees after the snap. But still, a really fun player. I think it's just an immediate upgrade over whatever the Bengals have on their defense. It was a historically bad season for them.
There's no shot they're not taking defense here, right? Like,
it would be funny if they walk up and take like Colston Loveland or something like that. I think
I think you're spot on here. I think like Al Golden, longtime defensive coordinator, I think at Miami too, loves his linebackers. I think this kind of read and react guy who like covers so much ground is going to be someone he really wants to get his hands on.
With Seattle, no shade to Colston Loveland. He goes here. Just a really fun fit with this offense. Just a zone heavy scheme. I think he's somebody that's going to be, like we talked about with Warren, just a really solid over the middle threat. He's a little bit more of a receiver than he is a true inline tight end. So
yeah,
with him, it's more of a, this is a guy who's going to give you 700 to 800 yards in a season, maybe a few touchdowns, a nice red zone threat as well. With the Seahawks, they lost DK Metcalf. I like their receiving group with, a guy like Cooper Kupp with JSN. Maybe those skill sets overlap a little bit, but with Colston Loveland, it's just a different type of player. A lot of these systems, similar to what Seattle's going to run this year, they typically rely a little bit more on tight ends than most teams would. So I think with Loveland, it's an immediate upgrade over Noah Fant. I think that Seattle's been pretty disappointed in what he's given them these past few years. So for them to get a guy who can, in my opinion, immediately upgrade their passing game, just a huge win all around.
Yeah, I think Loveland, he's not going to be a game changer in your run game. I do think he's like adequate as an arc blocker or blocking off the line. I don't think he's,
if he can lose slowly.
Yeah. As I'm watching him, I'm seeing him just like stalemate college defenders over and over again. And I'm like, that's, for Michigan, that's a win if your tight end's going to stalemate. He probably won't do that against NFL defenders, but if he can at least make some contact and not get run over, and I think he can, you can put him on field all 3 downs and
Yeah.
gets a win for you because he's such an athlete.
Right.
He's not even like a fantastic route runner, but he just gets open because of how smooth he is and who he's running against.
Very
Um,
fluid.
yeah, so he's like going over the middle, finding spots against linebackers is going to be like second nature to him. I think Sam Darnold's going to have like a constant option to throw from there.
With this next pick, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are selecting South Carolina safety Nick Emmanwori. This is kind of me just calling my shot a little bit here. I think that Tampa, they're retaining basically their entire starting offense. I don't really think they have to touch anything on that end. Defensively, they struggled a little bit in the secondary last year. They don't really have any starting caliber linebackers, all respect to the Lavonte David. Nick Emmanwori is just a guy who's going to be a little bit of a linebacker DB blend, almost similar to what Deion Buchanan was a few years ago when the Cardinals. I mean, that was a long time ago now, but I think it's almost a souped up version of that, where he's going to give you a lot in both the secondary and the linebacking rooms. He's a versatile, like, chess piece. Maybe he doesn't have the recognition you want in a linebacker, but just an athlete who can cover, who can support in the run game. I think that he's a mismatch if you have a creative defensive coordinator, which you would hope a head coach with a defensive background like Todd Bowles is able to utilize. So I think it's a fun fit with Emmanwori. Not everybody's cup of tea, I'll recognize, but just a really interesting fit here.
I'm really interested to see where Emmanwori goes and what he does. If he is, I don't know that I trust him closer to the line of scrimmage, even given his athleticism, because I think he gets, like, when I see him going into the box, I feel like he gets stuck a little. Comparing him to Jalen Walker, they're playing different positions, but he's not as good at like finding his paths, I think. So this is, even like much more so, I think, than Shamar Stewart. This is a traits pick, right? Like, you're banking
for sure
on being able to mold this guy who's tested as one of the most athletic defensive backs ever, who is like muscled up enough and physical enough to play a kind of money backer linebacker position, even at a defensive back's build. And you're hoping that either you can find a role in a defense that is simplified enough for him to just like click and go, or that you can turn him into a player. Tampa Bay with Bowles as like this defensive guy with a long history of defensive success could be that. And they're in kind of a position where they don't have to fear their division and they're returning a lot of success. So a boomer bust pick, I kind of actually really like for them. I feel like they probably feel that they're in a fairly luxury position at like in the draft, or at least in this round. And so adding someone who could either be a star or like not hurt them too much because they're already such a veteran team or such an established team. I can see that option for sure.
It's so interesting because even at places where you could theoretically take somebody at a quote unquote need, like maybe a receiver where you have two aging guys with Chris Godwin. I know they just re-signed him to a pretty big deal, but Mike Evans, this is the last year of his contract as well. They theoretically have another guy right behind them with Jalen McMillan, who impressed already. So I think with this pick, it is, like you said, a luxury to be able to take a traits-based player based on upside. I could also see like a Malachi Starks or maybe a Jahdae Barron with this pick as well. I think both of those guys would make a ton of sense.
Yeah. Or, I mean, you mentioned linebacker, and Lavonte David is playing like reasonably good football, but you don't like that could end basically any day. They could take Schlesinger, and I wouldn't be surprised either.
Right. It would be early, but I could see that, to be honest. I could see them taking a guy like that. I think he'll go higher than what most people expect. The Broncos, I have them taking Gray Zabel. This is kind of if you're familiar with the Saints drafting history in the late 2010s, early 2020s, they were never shy about taking interior offensive linemen, and this is kind of a reflection of that. They took, I believe it was Cesar Ruiz in the first round. I think they took Eric McCoy, either late first, early second. They were very they're not afraid to take those types of players early on. They invested in Jari Evans, I think, as well.
Evans, yeah.
Yeah, Jari Evans as well, in a pretty sizable contract in the 2010s. So they're a team who, they have Bo Nix. He looked impressive in year one. I think they're just going to make sure that the foundation is solid with him before, there's this could be an Omari and Hampton team, right? That wouldn't shock me one bit. But I think that they'll kind of make sure the foundation is safe up front. Like, I don't think they got the best center play last year after losing Lloyd Cushenberry. So they'll solidify the foundation, maybe take a shot on running back in the second or third round.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I could see this being a running back pick. It would be kind of funny for them to let go of Javonte Williams and immediately pick the next kind of like bruising Carolina back.
Yeah. Maybe a trade down spot as well if they're not keen on picking a guy. Maybe it's like somebody's coming up for a tackle or like a Matthew Golden or something like that. But yeah, I think it's a meat and potatoes kind of pick rather than something flashy.
Yeah, and it is, like, I think you're right. It's a very Sean Payton pick too.
Yeah, he's for the type of, I guess where public opinion sits on him is kind of just a creative play caller who, loves tight ends, running backs, players who are creative over the middle of the field. He also just likes to invest a ton into just pass rushers and the interior offensive line. Like, it's just something he's always done. So I think it just makes a ton of sense for him to take arguably the best interior offensive lineman in this draft. So with that, we'll move to the next 4 picks. I'll let you get it started with the Steelers.
Yeah, cool. So the Steelers, I have taking Walter Nolan, the defensive tackle from Ole Miss. The Chargers here get Omari and Hampton falling into their lap. Green Bay takes Mike Green. And Minnesota. I feel like for all 4 of these picks, I kind of felt like these just like all 4 of these teams are really, really happy with these picks. Minnesota takes Malachi Starks. So starting with Nolan, it's not a secret, I don't think, that Pittsburgh needs a presence on the defensive interior, needs pass rush really badly outside of what TJ Watt is giving them. And Nolan, I think, frees Watt up a lot. He's an absolute wrecking ball on the inside. Could go, honestly, like a lot higher than this. I think I would be surprised to take someone like Miami take him, someone like someone like Arizona even. He could very easily be a pick in the mid-teens. He's got that kind of talent. And I think here, like, he's an extremely Pittsburgh player. Just gets his work done. He's like a strong player. He plays physical, plays every down. I think he works.
Yeah.
This marriage works.
Yeah, he's kind of somebody where he's really good at a lot of things, but not necessarily elite at others. I think he makes sense for the Steelers where, a lot of people have them taking maybe a receiver before the DK Metcalf trade. Maybe this is a potential quarterback spot if Aaron Rodgers doesn't come here. Maybe it's like a Jalen Milroe or a Jackson Dart, one of those 2 guys. I know our friend Jacob, draft expert at the 2-point conversion, loves Jalen Milroe at this spot. I think that Walter Nolan makes a ton of sense. He's a very Steelers type of pick for sure.
Yeah. The Chargers taking Omari and Hampton, I think would make just about every Justin Herbert fan like explode with happiness. Omari and Hampton, I watched every game he played this season. Carolina had, for 3 games, possibly the worst quarterback play I've ever seen in college, and for the other 9 games, barely average quarterback play. And Omari and Hampton single-handedly made them bowl eligible. Like, he's that type of a game changer, that type of a person who, like, he's offense proof, quarterback proof. He gets the ball, he runs into you, and he runs over you for 5 yards a carry.
Yeah. He's. I gush about Omari and Hampton every time I talk about him, just because the surrounding situation for Hampton was about as bad as you could get for running back that's going to end up being picked in the top 32. You might be able to talk about the offensive scheme a little bit more, having covered
Mhm.
UNC, but I feel like every single handoff he was given at UNC was just a delayed draw, and it just got so old after a while. And yet, he would be staring down, three players that immediately beat their offensive linemen and still somehow end up getting like 5 to 10 yards in a first down. Like it was incredible to watch. And even when he wasn't affecting like the run game, he was arguably UNC's best receiver last year as well. So just all in all, a tremendous offensive weapon. And I think somebody that Jim Harbaugh especially is going to be very, very high on.
I think the telling thing is that he had like a 1,300-yard season or something in 2023 with Drake May as his quarterback. And then he did it again with like future car salesmen as his quarterbacks. And he's just, it does not matter what you throw at him behind the line of scrimmage. He gets ahead of steam so quickly and gets into space really well. He doesn't have like the best moves in the open field, but at his size, he's fast enough that doesn't even really matter. That he can just kind of break games anyways. He's an awesome, awesome player. He can be a good pass protector even at times. He's a 3-down back in that way. Sometimes he will get like beaten off of his hip, but he's physical. He puts his body into people. He puts his hands into people. And I think that's something that can be coached from an inconsistency to a strength. He's not maybe to the level of the best backs that we have seen in the NFL who can do everything, but he can be everything. I think he's like, I just think he's awesome. I think he's going to become an offense's like best friend right away.
Yeah, I think immediately you're looking at a Pro Bowl caliber running back, which I'm not afraid to say about like the running back position, and a guy that's probably going to end up going first round. I think his range really starts at 10 with Chicago, and there's a few options, right? Like Dallas could take him. We could even see a team like, the Broncos take him as well.
Yeah.
There's a few teams in that, 10 to, I really think this is maybe not the floor for him, but pretty close to it. 22 with the Chargers. Just a super fun player for sure.
Yeah. Green Bay taking Mike Green, the pass rusher. It seems like Green Bay has needed a pass rusher for like half a decade at this point and just not either not made or missed on the level of investment that they would want to get at that position. So here they take the NCAA's sacks leader, who also just happened to post a ridiculous 3-cone time in his pro day the other day.
Yeah.
A marriage of traits and production, I think, that gives them a really high floor at this position and hopefully takes their defense into the level that it needs to be to support what Jordan Love can give them.
Yeah, there's a few reported character concerns, but it doesn't seem like the NFL's too concerned about that sort of thing with Mike Green. Just really athletic, maybe at the smallest bit undersized. I don't think it really matters with Mike Green's skill set, though. Just incredibly productive. He was, not only productive against the opponents that Marshall was playing on a weekly basis, but also teams like Ohio State as well. So he's a player who I think is just a really solid edge rusher, potential to be a, primary edge rusher. And on a team that, they have Rashawn Gary, they have Lucas Van Ness, they still need like a primary type of guy.
Yeah.
And even if Mike Green's not that from the jump, right, he's gonna, I think as a rookie, be able to give you 6-7 sacks. And that's more than enough for like the 23rd overall pick, especially a player on a rookie contract that's going to continue to grow. Very fun fit there.
Yeah. And then Minnesota taking Malachi Starks. I think the consensus kind of best safety in the class. But for me, his value is in the defense that he played on in Georgia, for as gimmicky as it is. I think on the front end and the back end, it's kind of, I don't know if you'd say gimmicky in a different way, but he does a lot of different things as a safety /nickelback I guess like star player is what a lot of college defenses call it. Um, his 2024 tape, I think probably they gave him a little bit more responsibility than would put him at his best. So there's like there are a few different plays of him just getting roasted as a nickelback. I think if you play him as a safety and then play off of that the way that I know Minnesota can in that defense with Flores, I think that becomes really, really interesting. He is a great center field player, I think, uh, in a way that so many NFL teams are like hunting and hunting and hunting for someone who just like has range and finds the ball when the ball goes deep. He fills lanes really well. He plays a lot of traditional safety roles, and then once you do that, I think there's also a lot of interesting things that a creative defensive coordinator can do with him because of his athleticism and the experience that he has playing different roles in Georgia's defense.
Yeah, I think Brian Flores is arguably the most creative and probably the best defensive coordinator in the NFL at the current moment. And
Mm-hmm.
oftentimes with, not only just secondary players, but with defenders as a whole, what he demands is being able to do more, right? The versatility. It allows him to be more creative in how he can scheme up players and looks to throw at offenses, right? We saw it with how that defensive line or edge rusher room at least was constructed last year with, Jonathan Grenard, Dallas
Mm-hmm.
Turner, with Andrew Van Ginkel had a fantastic season. You're seeing
Yeah.
it with how they constructed the interior defensive line as well, with signing Javon Hargrave and Jonathan Allen. And I know that's just front seven guys, but it applies to the secondary as well. So I think getting a guy like Malachi Starks, who's just another chess piece, and you talk about this secondary, like Harrison Smith is up there as well. Like he is an old safety. Um, I think getting a guy like Malachi Starks, where they tried to solve this safety position, or at least complement Smith a few years ago when they drafted Lewis Cine, didn't work out. I think
Yeah.
Malachi Starks is a completely different level of player. I know some Vikings fans might have some PTSD from that pick, another Georgia safety, but I think that this would be a really fun pick for the Vikings. So, any existing thoughts on not only Malachi Starks to Minnesota, but this quad of players as a whole?
Um, I think not much other than, like I said at the outset, this is a lot of teams are getting guys that I think have draft ceilings a lot higher than this, right? Like I could see all
Yeah,
four of these guys going in the teens without even questioning it. So I don't know. I guess this draft class, I've called it weak. I know a lot of people have called it weak, but I suppose in this kind of like 15 to 25 range, there's a lot of players that teams are going to be really happy to get. I think.
I think it's a weak draft class, but it's also more of a pick your flavor type of draft class where there's a ton of players that would work really well on specific teams, right? I mean,
Mhm.
we talked about like Amari Hampton, for instance. For some teams, they're just not going to need a running back. Like there's just so many in the league already. But with 4 or 5 teams in particular in the first round, they might just value him incredibly high and what they can do um, for their offense in particular. Um, but I think like it's the same thing with like the tight ends, right? Which of Colston
Mhm.
Loveland or Tyler Warren do you value in your specific offense? I think it's just going to create, a lot of variance after, maybe pick 5 or 6. Honestly, I think there's a lot of variance that could happen after that. But
Yeah.
moving on to kind of this next four uh, players that I picked, it was this is kind of where I started to get a little bit of creative. Obviously, the last 4 players that I picked in this mock draft, but I kind of took some liberty with how creative I was in the selections. So I had we'll talk about the Texans first, selecting Darius Alexander, the defensive tackle out of Toledo. Really fun player, versatile on the interior, just an incredible run defender. I think that, with this selection, there's a lot of different like defensive tackles. I mean, we talked about players like Derek Harmon who could go at this pick. I think that, Alexander makes a ton of sense for the Texans who need, a run stuffer in particular. And he was very impressive in the MAC. Um, I think a lot of people are going to want an offensive lineman here. Maybe a Tyler Booker,
Yeah.
um, maybe a Josh Connerly, somebody like that. Um, Nick Caserio's kind of done some like shenanigans lately. I question his team building a little bit. I mean, you've heard me question it a lot where they've been
Mhm.
handing out a ton of guaranteed money as of late.
Yeah.
And I really do think with Cam Robinson, I hate to say it, but I think they're comfortable with Ed Ingram. Titus Howard, obviously, they restructured his deal. And I think Blake Fisher is the other one on that line as well. So I think they're legitimately comfortable passing on an offensive lineman in the first round, as crazy as that might be. But it's also something where I don't think they're going to want to force that either. So Darius Alexander, a fun fit on the interior of their defensive line. Between him, Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, and the existing talent on their defense, there's a real chance that this could be a top 3 defense in 2025.
Mhm. Yeah, I would be stunned if they didn't take an offensive lineman. I think Booker works here. I think Simmons works here. Um,
Yeah,
but
I will say that like this is really these 4 picks are
it
just
is
me trying
it.
to get some
Oh, for
names in
sure.
here, you
Oh,
know?
for sure. Yeah, it's not the wildest thing that an NFL team would want to would want to make a strength stronger. It
Yeah,
is wilder than usual to try to do that when you have a rookie or when you have a quarterback on a rookie contract who looked
yeah.
as good in his rookie season as CJ Stroud did, but there's some kind of like tortured front office logic for like our defense was really good last year and we made it to the playoffs with the offensive situation being as dire as it was.
It
So if
kinda
that's going to
reminds
be our
me
strength,
it kinda reminds me just the tiniest bit of when everybody was screaming for the Packers to draft a wide receiver in the first round, like, early Jordan Love, late Aaron Rodgers,
mhm,
and, they went ahead and they took Eric Stokes in the first round. When I mean, they needed a corner, but, not as much as they needed a receiver. Obviously, this is different where, like, offensive line, foundation of your team, right? So it's a
mhm.
little bit different, but I don't think that they'll be pressured into taking an offensive lineman if there's not one available. And
Yeah, I
I
guess
think
that's the other thing is that
Alexander's a
like
go
yeah, I
ahead.
think Alexander. Or I don't know too much about Alexander, but it seems like from the glimpses I've caught from the stuff I've read, seems like a worthy pick here. And if I am putting myself in the mind of a Houston front office making this pick, like Joe Mixon ran for, what, like 4.85 yards a carry. There's
Yeah.
something there with this offensive line, even if it wasn't protecting CJ Stroud like it should have been. So, like, I can imagine banking on chemistry and again, like trying to make a strength stronger, get CJ into the playoffs again on the strength of a defense, and just try to see if he can cook again.
Yeah, and I think the other aspect is I don't think the Texans have taken a small school guy the entire time Caserio's been a GM there. Like I think they've
Mhm.
only taken Power 5 players. So maybe it's not a realistic pick for Alexander to be mocked here. Maybe it is more of like a Derek Harmon type. But moving on to the LA Rams, Mason Taylor, I think he's going to go a little bit higher than expected. The tight end out of LSU. He is, all around just a solid blocker, a solid pass catcher. He didn't really do too much at LSU, just not a huge part of their offensive system, in terms of manufacturing touches for him.
Mhm.
But he's a player who projects really easily to the NFL. He fits perfectly into a Sean McVay type of offense. And I think that, the Rams have been searching for a starting tight end for like 3 years. It's pretty well documented how they tried to trade up for a guy like Brock Bowers. Maybe
Mhm.
this is an Elijah Arroyo team out of Miami, but I have Mason Taylor, picked here. This is probably more of a trade down situation if they end up taking him. Maybe they move back to, a little bit later in the first, maybe even early second. But this is more just me slotting a player that I think would be a really good fit on a particular team. So I have Mason Taylor on the LA Rams.
Yeah, I think that makes a ton of sense. I have Taylor, Arroyo from Miami, and Fannin out of Bowling Green all kind of around the same for tight ends, just below the Loveland and Warren tier. Doing different things, I think Taylor probably the most well-rounded of the three, given that he didn't have to do, given that he wasn't like a focal point of the offense the way that the other two were at times. McVay would definitely like this kind of player, and yeah, I have seen everything that you've seen about them having wanted a tight end or wanted Bowers last year. This makes a lot of sense. It's like there are 5 top 50-ish worthy tight ends, and I would not. It would be surprising if the Rams didn't find a way to get one of them. I think
he just feels like a Rams type of tight end, and in kind of the same way that these next 2 picks kind of feel like. I'll kind of group them together a little bit. They just feel like Ravens and Lions picks, especially JT Tuimoloau to the Detroit Lions. But I'll hit on Josh Simmons first. I think the Ravens very clearly need another offensive lineman. He maybe is not an immediate like left tackle for you. Maybe I don't know how they view Roger Rosengarten after 1 year on the right side, but maybe you look at Josh Simmons over on that side first. Maybe you slide him at left guard. I think this is more just about getting 5 high quality offensive linemen on the field. They lost Patrick McCarry to the Jacksonville Jaguars. They gave him a pretty sizable deal. So I think this is a pretty clean fit for a team that, they've been able to find these offensive linemen and, on day 2 and on day 3. Obviously, they took Linderbaum in the first round, but I think Josh Simmons would just be a pretty solid fit for a team. And I think schematically it works as well. Tuimoloau, just a nasty defensive end who's athletic, who was extremely productive in college. I think the Lions have kind of been looking for a secondary pass rusher next to Aiden Hutchinson for a while, and Tuimoloau just provides exactly that.
Yeah, I like Tuimoloau to Detroit a lot. Feels like the same kind of guy that they've been making hay with. Where like just obviously good college players who get underrated because like of some sort of perceived lack. Exactly the type of guy I think Dan Quinn makes money with.
Yeah, for sure. I think it would be maybe a reach on most people's boards, but it's a premier position. I think the Lions, not that matters to them, having taken a running back and linebacker in the first round pretty recently, but just it fits Dan Campbell so well, this type of player, for sure.
When I say Dan Quinn, I meant Campbell.
Very good. Moving on to the last 4 picks in this mock draft. I'll let you get started on your final 4 picks.
Yeah. So I'll try and go a little quickly through them. The first 2 of these picks are kind of just like, I think they make sense, but they're also just kind of my draft crushes of the draft. Makubu and Iziraku, the safety from Makuba and Iziraku. Makuba, the safety from Texas, Iziraku, the edge rusher from Boston College. For me, Makuba is the best safety in the draft. I love him as a coverage safety. I think he's like the way that he actually matches routes downfield is, I think, unmatched in this class at his position. He fills the hole really well. He's an aggressive tackler. Another one of these Texas guys where I knew they were rated highly, and then I put on the tape and I was like, oh, this is like just an incredible football player. Whatever team gets him, I think he's going to get an instant upgrade at the back end of their secondary and be really happy. And then Iziraku, one of the few guys I had an opinion on in this class before draft season really started because I watched him in the ACC on a defense that is like pretty lacking in talent, but really well coached. He made everything tick around him. I thought he's got a really extensive pass rush plan. He's got one of the best bends in the class, a smidge undersized, but still plays really hard against the run. I think works to the inside and outside of offensive tackles. Has good hands to finish plays. I think both of them are just going to be really solid football players and make teams better immediately.
Yeah, I think a lot of people might think that this is a little bit early from Cuba, from Texas. Just I would push back on that a little bit, just because the regime there seems pretty willing to take their shot on a player who they deem worthy of a pretty high pick. If you look at where they took Luke McCaffrey, it was about 2 rounds earlier than what most people
Mhm.
expected. Ben Sinnott, I think, was projected late second, third round, maybe. They took him a little bit earlier than what most people expected. So I think it's a team where, if they really believe in a guy, they're going to be willing to take them pretty high. And he fits Washington and Dan Quinn as well. With Ezra Rockwu, I'm a little bit lower on him than most people. I see him as like mid day two, late second round type of guy. Very, very skilled edge rusher, though. And I think he would add a lot to a room that I know they have Greg Rousseau. I know they have Joey Bosa, but Bosa is a little bit injured most of the time. And Rousseau, he doesn't put up the numbers that you would think that he does for a guy who's going to get paid $20 million a year. So I think as a Rockwood is going to be a guy where, maybe it's only 5 sacks or so in year one, but if he's able to develop behind those types of players and eventually grow into somebody a little bit better and kind of live up to a second contract for the Buffalo Bills, I think it makes a ton of sense. And I think another thing here is you can never have too many edge rushers either.
Yeah, definitely. It's a premium position that thins out pretty quickly, I think, after this first round. There's still like good guys, but I think if you want an edge rusher out of this draft, taking one of the first 50 picks makes a ton of sense. And then these last two picks kind of just feel are a little, I don't know a ton about front offices, but these just feel kind of obvious. We've talked about Tyler Booker as an option for like several teams already. And after watching Kansas City's offensive line get just absolutely dog walked in the Super Bowl, I think picking someone for them who like plays with a lot of nasty back onto a defensive line that's getting after him at the interior makes a lot of sense. Kansas City has had a publicized need at tackle, but they also did just lose a pretty good guard, I think.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So adding a guard who plays heavy, who plays nasty, who will both bolster the Kansas City run game and keep Mahomes on his feet makes a ton of sense. And then for Philadelphia's pick, I'm only like 25% joking when I say I looked at the consensus board and checked to see who the highest rated person was left, because it seems like the way that they make their money is finding players who slip. Matthew Golden is a receiver who might not be the complete kind of X guy that Ted McMillan is or that Travis Hunter can be, but adds a dimension that, they've got fast guys for sure on the Philadelphia perimeter, but adding someone with speed in the 4.2s who can just add another page to all of the threats that they are throwing at you makes a really potent offense like just scarier.
Yeah, I'll start with Tyler Booker because I think that he's an incredible fit on a Kansas City offensive line, right? Like Trey Smith is already like one of the nastiest offensive guards that you're going to find in the NFL. So to pair him
Mhm.
with a guy like Tyler Booker, I think is just really fun for Kansas City. Just a really powerful interior offensive line between those two and Creed Humphrey. And then with Matthew Golden, he's the type of player that, despite the Eagles having guys like AJ Brown, like Devontae Smith, and Dallas Goddard as well, I think Matthew Golden is somebody who could flourish even without the ball in his hands, which is weird to say about a receiver, but it's almost like, and maybe not the best comparison, but it's almost like the worthy thing where he's just going to be able to create space downfield for those guys,
Mhm.
even if he's not going to have the ball in his hands. Where 4.2 speed is incredibly rare. And I will say it didn't necessarily show up on tape all the time, but
Yeah.
I think that he's just a useful player at any receiver spot, just going to be able to, contribute from day one, if not with the ball in his hands, then just being able to create space for guys like AJ Brown and Devontae Smith, and just another player that DBs have to account for.
Yeah, it adds a lot of depth to, I think, any offense. It like it, he's got a really high floor for your offense, right? Even if it's not as necessarily as a player, an offensive coordinator with like a brain cell is going to find a way to use him to make the rest of the offense better without needing a ton from him right away.
For sure. So in review, let's kind of recap the entire mock draft. Picks 1 through 4. The Titans select Cam Ward. The Browns select Abdul Carter. The Giants take Shedeur Sanders. And the Patriots take Travis Hunter, who is primarily going to play receiver. The Jacksonville Jaguars take Mason Graham. The Raiders take Membu. The Jets take Tyler Warren. And the Panthers take Michael Williams. The New Orleans Saints select Kenneth Grant. The Bears take Shamar Stewart. The 49ers, Will Campbell. And the Cowboys, Ashton Jeanty. Picks 13 through 16. The Dolphins take Will Johnson. The Colts take Kelvin Banks. The Falcons, Jalen Walker. And the Cardinals, Tet McMillan. Now we've got the Bengals at 17. They take Jihad Campbell. The Seahawks take Colston Loveland. The Bucks take Nick Emanwari. And the Broncos draft Gray Zabel. At 18, at 21, the Steelers select Walter Nolan. The Chargers, Amari and Hampton. The Packers, Mike Green. And the Vikings, Malachi Starks. At 25, the Texans take Darius Alexander. The Rams take Mason Taylor. The Ravens take Josh Simmons. And the Lions select JT Tuimalau. At 29, the Commanders select Andrew Mukuba. The Buffalo Bills take Donovan Ezeurakwu. The Kansas City Chiefs select Tyler Booker. And the Eagles, to close it out, take Matthew Golden. I will just hit on a few of the players that were not selected. In my opinion, some of the better player availables left. TreVeyon Henderson, running back out of Ohio State, super electric player. Another Ohio State guy, Emeka Egbuka. I'd be pretty surprised if he made it out of the first round. Just a really solid overall player. Luther Burden, Missouri, electric after the catch. Very solid hands as well.
I think we have, 3 receivers going in this first round. I think that's way low for what's actually going to happen.
Yeah.
Just the way the teams have been drafting lately.
And it's weird, too, because there's just after Travis Hunter, there's a bunch of guys that I think the league views in the same tier, right? Like Tet McMillan, Egbuka, Golden, Luther Burden as well. So it'll be interesting to see who actually makes it into the first round, but it does feel like we're a little bit low on the number that's going to go. After those guys, a pair of Oregon guys with Josh Connerly and Derek Harmon, and then we have James Pierce falling out, which seems to be pretty realistic, followed by Jahdae Barron and Maxwell Harrison. I think of the players that I just listed, Jahdae Barron is probably the most likely to go in round 1. It's just he's a little bit more.
I was going to say the same thing.
It's a harder fit for a player like him, like a nickel type of player, to find a spot for him in the first round. So do you have any other thoughts on kind of those best available remaining players?
I was going to say the same thing, that I think of who we left out, Barron is probably the most likely. Probably where the easiest thing to do is just to slot him in to where any of the safeties were taken between Mukuba, Starks, and Emanwari.
Right.
I think good at what he does, but it's nickelback's another one of those positions where because of size constraints and how a prototypical nickel corner does basically one thing for you, and that's a hard player to sometimes justify taking in round 1. But Barron's a really good player.
Yeah, he's a really fun player. There's just so many Texas guys this year. Maxwell Harrison, he lit up the combine with, I think it was a 4.28 40-yard dash. Just electric. I think that he could potentially go maybe even in the top 20 as well. So there's a lot of talent in like that 20 to 40-ish range this
Mhm.
year. So even with a guy like Travion Henderson, we mentioned like earlier how the Raiders took Armand Membu, how maybe that's a destination for Henderson in this type of mock draft. So,
Mhm.
do you have any additional thoughts on maybe guys that didn't make the cut, or maybe your favorite fit of this mock draft, or anything of that nature?
Um, I don't know. Basically everyone in these teens, I think, is at the very least really interesting. Will Campbell in San Francisco is obviously perfect. Genti in
Yeah,
Dallas is like the dream outcome for them. McMillan in Arizona makes that offense really fun. Uh, Loveland in Seattle combined with what they've got on the perimeter. Uh, I would be fascinated to see what Sam Darnold could do with that in a new environment. Um, just a lot of kind of imperfect but really funky stuff.
yeah. I think my three favorite fits. I mean, Will Campbell to San Francisco is probably number one, just because he's immediately going to be an upgrade over honestly whatever they had previously on the offensive line. I think that Kenneth Grant to New Orleans makes a ton of sense, and not many people have talked about that so far. And Mike Green to Green Bay. First of all, just the name, like he would sell so many jerseys, right? Um, I think it's just a really fun fit for a team that needs some edge rushing help. So with that, I'm going to implore everybody watching the stream to follow the 2 Point Conversion on Twitter if you have not already at 2P_conversion. We are launching our website in less than a week. I'm super excited about that. Shout out to our graphic designer, Cole, who's done a ton of work on that. It looks phenomenal. We're going to have a draft guide come out really soon. And yeah, I'm super excited to kind of see where everything goes. Akil, do you have anything that you want to plug before we get out of here?
I think that's it. The two PC guys are going to have the detailed draft information. I might have a couple of UNC draft profiles out where the other place I write at Tar Heel blog. But I'm excited for the site to drop. I'm excited to be writing for it and excited for the draft.
All right. With that, we'll get out of here. I appreciate everybody for listening, for watching live
Mhm.
on Twitter and YouTube. And I will possibly be back on Thursday with another podcast. So, once again, thank you. Follow, subscribe, everything on there. Again, we're just kind of starting the site up. So, every follower means a lot. We're excited to get things going. And yeah, I will see you all